I get asked all the time, how did you edit that photo? What preset were you using? Is that a filter on your pictures? And sometimes, yes, I use presets, but most of the time I just do a slight bit of editing. So today I'm going to show how I edit my pictures in Lightroom. Now, a couple disclaimers. Most of these are going to be portrait photos. You do not have to have Lightroom in order to do some of these techniques. They can be done in basic editing programs like the built-in ones on your phone or your iPad or your computer. I will be using the newest version of Lightroom, but Lightroom Classic works. All right, let's get started. All right, so let's start by opening up some of Lightroom here. So you see I've pre-selected 4 images. Let's take a look here. Now this is before editing. This is just the raw photo right out of the camera. Try to choose a variety of images here. So let's start with this one right here. So this photo doesn't really need much. It's pretty clean as it is. The lighting is good, exposure is good. So I probably won't do much on this one at all. So I like to always start by adjusting exposure, just a tiny bit. Shadows I'm gonna bring down just a little bit. And then right here in this point curve, I always use this. I do a very small, subtle thing. I make sort of like a hockey stick thing here, and it kind of just changes the blacks and the shadows a little bit. So we'll put a mark dead center. We'll put another mark center of the 2, and then we'll put another one in the center of the center again. And I like to grab this and bring this up a little bit. So you'll notice a subtle effect that has on the pictures. Kind of flattens it a little bit. I like that flat, sort of matte look to it. All right, next we are going to look in the color section. So you could kind of find the right white balance here. It was shot already with the correct white balance, but we can play with it just a little bit. I do think it's pretty much good where it is. Now, if you need to like reset your sliders in Lightroom, just double click the selection and it will revert back to the original spot. So for colors, I almost always, my personal style, I love to take the oranges and just bring them down a little bit to the other side towards like magenta. I'll increase the saturation just a tad. Go to effects here. Now usually in photos like this, I won't really adjust clarity that much. So I'll probably just leave that where it is. I will dehaze this a little bit, which kind of brings out some of the light, like the shine out of like the window there. I'm gonna go back up to light because now I'm seeing some adjustments that I wanna make. So I definitely want to increase contrast. I wanna bring the highlights down just a little bit. And if you bring them down all the way, you can see the detail come back into the window. Now I don't want all the detail to come back in the window, but I do want a little bit because I'm going to end up adding a little bit extra there. So we'll put that there. Now let's just take a look at before and after so far. And you could do that by hitting / on your keyboard. Now I do use a Mac, but it's / before and after, before and after. So it's getting a little more moody. It's a little more contrasty. So next thing I want to do is I want to add a gradient. So I go into my mask, create mask section, add a linear gradient and drag that from the window down onto the subject of the photo. I want to increase the exposure as if that window has more light coming out of it. And I want to do the reverse by bringing the dehaze to a negative, and it'll kind of add some glow, some light glow from that window a little bit. I'll also increase the temperature a tiny bit so it looks a little bit warmer. Perfect. Before and after, don't forget to check. Before and after. Now I noticed that there is a little orangey, little yellow in the chair here. So I'm gonna go back to my color adjustments. I'm gonna select yellow and I'm gonna drag that down a little bit. See if that punches up a little bit more vintage looking. Decrease the saturation a tiny bit. Now I'm gonna add one more mask. This mask is gonna be another linear gradient, but I'm actually gonna do it from the opposite side. From the opposite side of the subject, opposite side of the window. And I'm gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna decrease the saturation a little bit. And I'm going to do the dehaze just a tiny, tiny bit. Before and after, before and after. So the reason I use the linear gradient on the side is if I use a vignette, it does the vignette on the entire image, is where I can sort of just vignette on one half of the image while leaving the other side still bright. Now as far as cropping, you could argue that this photo is a little crooked. I kind of just like it a little off crooked. I'm okay with that. Kind of looks more natural in my opinion, so perfect. We're good with that one. All right, so there's the finished image. Again, very mild editing, nothing crazy. Let's move on to our next image. So this one's gonna require a little bit more editing because it's kind of flat and kind of lacking that mood that I usually like in photos. There's really no mood to this. It just seems like a snapshot almost. Exposure is good, so I'm actually gonna bring the exposure down a little bit because I'm gonna use the darkness of the image to sort of hopefully create a little bit better contrast, a little bit better pop. So let's increase the contrast a little bit, not too much. Shadows I'll bring down. Again, I want this one to be a little bit more moody. It's outside, but it's not really necessarily luscious with color like nature outside, so we gotta kind of play with that and take it to a certain direction. Go ahead and add my point curve, my little hockey stick. Not too much on this one because you can really see it kind of blow out the blacks in the image there. So I'm not gonna go quite as much here. Now for color, we're gonna go really crazy on color. So first thing is on green, I'm gonna bring the greens all the way to like yellow. I'm gonna reduce that saturation quite a bit. Yellows are gonna have the biggest impact. Now, you gotta be careful with yellows because yellows, it's sometimes in skin tones, so you don't wanna go too crazy unless the image has a nice balance to it. So I'm gonna bring yellows down towards red, saturation down, luminous down, just a little bit of the light there. Okay, orange, you know I love to mess with oranges. Certain images, I can't do the thing I love with oranges because it creates way too much kind of magenta, so we're not gonna go that far. I do wanna increase the luminous of orange because that's a lot of that's in the skin, so you're gonna see that brighten up right there. Now I like the color profile so far, but it's a little cold, like a little cool, so we'll increase the temperature of the image. That's better, but now certain things look a little too saturated, so I'm gonna just take a little bit of the saturation out. Okay, this is starting to look kind of like my style, what I like. So I'm gonna close color, go back to light. I'm going to increase the contrast for this image. I'm gonna adjust my line, curve it a little bit, less of a hockey stick and more of just like a broken stick here. For effects, I'm gonna take a little bit of negative clarity. Clarity will add like, kind of like a sharpening effect sometimes, but I'm gonna take out a little bit. It's actually gonna soften the skin and soften the image a little bit, so I kind of like that. For dehaze, little bit of a vignette, little bit there. Definitely gonna add some grain in this image. I want it to look kind of more film-like. Now I do wanna go back to color. I do think we took too much of the green out and the yellow. Don't forget to always check your befores and afters. Make sure you're not going too far off the deep end here with your edits. It's a pretty dramatic edit from the original to this one. So there is something I want to do here. The background and the foreground kind of mesh too much. I want there to be a difference of separation there. So I'm going to select subject in the mask area. And then I'm going to increase the exposure and the shadows of just the subject. Add a little bit more separation from the foreground and the background, the subject and the background. Take a closer look. Things look good. Before and after. I want to clean this up just a tiny bit. I want to go back into color. I want to go to that orange. I think I'm gonna reset it. Take that temperature slightly cool and add a little bit more vignette. And there's our finished product, before and after. This isn't just an example of brightening and fixing the exposure. This is completely shifting colors, which is often why I think people ask if I have a filter or like used a preset. All right, so here is the finished image number 2. Now let's move on to the next image. And before I start editing this, I'm probably gonna edit this similar to the previous image. I think the tones in the color of this image might be a good starting point for this image. So I'm going to copy settings from this image using Command C on the keyboard. I'm going to go to the next photo and I'm going to apply those settings with Command V. Now immediately you can tell it's way too dark. But we have a pretty good starting point as far as the tone and the overall look of the image. So let's go up into the light category. Let's increase this exposure. Let's adjust my point curve back to the hockey puck. Decrease the contrast a little too much. The saturation I think we can bring back. So let's go to our color. Now I like where everything's at here. The oranges, yes, see for here I can adjust the orange a little bit more than the last image. So I'm gonna bring that down a little bit. Bring the luminous up of the color there. One thing I want to check on is my highlights, because this area right here is a little high exposed. So let's bring down the highlights a little bit. There we go, there we go. Things are looking a lot clearer now. Clarity's down. I don't think we need the clarity down. Maybe we do. Maybe we do. Put the clarity back down a little bit. I think the vignette and all that is pretty good. Actually, I'm gonna take the vignette off. We're gonna try that linear gradient again, see if that does anything. Color temperature is pretty good. Check the color temp. Don't wanna go too far. I'm gonna add a little bit of vibrance. All right, so let's go into the linear gradient like we've been doing and drag one across the subject from one side where the light is coming. You always want to do it from where it looks like the light is coming. And you can tell by any highlights on the cheek or the nose or the forehead. Like if the highlight is on the left, then the sun is probably coming from the left or the right or whatever that looks like. So let's increase exposure from that side, not too much, just a little. Let's bring the hazing down a tiny bit. Increase the temperature to warm. And I think that's good, but I do want to add another one to this side coming from the back and do the opposite again, right? A little bit darker, maybe dehaze it a little bit. Not too bad, not too bad. All right, so again, looking at this image, I think we're a little bit overexposed in the dress. We're losing some detail. The highlights might be the reason, so let's go back into the light area. Let's lower those highlights down even more, maybe even a tad on exposure. Now it's making the overall image darker, as you can tell, but it is revealing detail back into the dress, which is, we do want that detail, want that sharpness. So to compensate for that, I'm going to add another mask. This is a radial gradient, and we're gonna actually add it just over the top area of the subject, their upper body and their head. And we're gonna increase exposure to get some of that back. Shadows, not too much, just a little bit. Don't forget, check before and after. Pretty dramatic difference so far, right? Just like the last image. Before, after, before, after. Now, again, we're talking about personal taste. You may think that this is an edit direction you'd never go in. There's greens in there that I'm basically eliminating, but this is just the mood that I'm feeling from this particular photo from that particular day. Now I do want to zoom in here, and I do want to see if the sharpening will add anything or not. So I'm going to go in here, I'm just going to increase sharpness a little bit. And yeah, I think it looks fine. I think it looks good. Nothing too crazy, nothing too heavy. I do want to maybe bump the shadows a little bit in the overall image. Back to kind of maybe, back to flat, just back to 0. I took them down originally. At the end is typically where I make finer little adjustments based on my final result. So the overall edit is gonna hit all at once, top down, but then I like to go in individually and adjust little sliders and stuff. A little bit more saturation. I like to test things too, like put something on and off again just to see if I like it or not. In Lightroom, you can actually hold this little eye icon and it'll show you what it looks like if you took that section away. So there's without the color mixer adjustments, and there it is with it. So you can definitely tell what you're adjusting from that area. All right, I think this is good. I think it's good the way it is. All right, here's the final image. All right, we have one more image here. This image I selected very specifically because it has a lot of sky in it, and also the subject is underexposed because the camera and my settings were exposed for the sky. So that sometimes, depending on where the light source is coming from, can keep your subject underexposed, but there is ways to kind of combat that. So we're gonna do that on this image. So let's take a look here. As always, let's start at light. Now exposure, we can kind of play with, but again, it's pretty much correct there. But for shadows, I'm gonna increase that because you'll notice even in the bushes and the tree trunk that you can't really see it because it is really, really dark. But we increase the shadows, so there's the opposite. There's what we're affecting. We're affecting that area. That's the dark area. And I'm gonna pump that up a little bit. It's gonna flatten it out a little bit, but we're gonna add some contrast later. All right, looks good. Highlights. Highlights are good. Nothing really left to adjust here in the light area. We'll come back in a moment. So before I adjust the color temperature, for photos that have sky in it, I typically like to push the blues towards like a teal. So if you go all the way, you'll see the teal really light up in this image, but I really just want it to be a subtle difference. So this versus this, very subtle. I also like to decrease the saturation of the sky, almost like a gray sky sometimes. You know, I'm gonna do the oranges. I love my oranges a certain way. For this image, I think yellow. There's some yellow over here in the tree, so I'm going to move that down. We're gonna go right about there. We're gonna go up in the luminous a little bit, have that pop a little bit more. Nice. There's also some yellow down here on the concrete. This was a skate park, by the way. We took this image. All right, now let's look at temperature. Do we need to go warmer or cooler? So this is where it is originally. I don't think I'm gonna increase it. Maybe just a smidge, just a tiny little bit. Otherwise, we're pretty good. All right, so let's go into effects here. Let's talk about dehazing. So if I go here real strong, it sort of adds contrast and saturation. If I go this way, it sort of takes away contrast and saturation. But I do want to take a little bit of away. I want to flatten it just a tiny bit. Not much at all. No vignette, no grain, nothing like that. Now my point curve, let's add it just for fun. Let's see if it looks good in this image. I don't usually like it on bright images, but let's see. No. All right, let's come back into light and let me increase the contrast a little bit. Nothing crazy. All right, now the big part of this image, because if you look before and after, it's an improvement as far as how the foreground and the background looks, but it's still not good. We still have, the subject is mostly underexposed here. So we're gonna use the select subject mask, which is going to cut out our subject automatically, mind you. We're gonna increase the exposure, shadows, till we feel good about it. I like it, I like it. Now we can make finer adjustments and it's gonna affect the entire image. So if I wanna bring the highlights down a little bit, do that. Increase the contrast. Are we going overboard with our before and after? No, not really. Things are looking good. I do think this image would benefit from some clarity, again, which is not something I normally use on portraits, but I like it here. I think I would like it here a little bit. I'm gonna go back into the color to my blue and bring the saturation up a tiny bit and bring it a little bit more towards teal and bring up that saturation just a tiny, tiny bit. Now, there are some greens in this image, not much. I can kind of put those towards more foresty green, but nothing crazy. looks good. I'll show you what it would look like with the vignette and without it, without a vignette. Add a little there. It does suck you into the center of the image a little bit more, so I think I'll use it only for that purpose, just to get you drawn in a little bit closer. Before and after, before and after. And then I might increase the sharpness up a little bit too. Make this a little bit of a sharp image. Play with this, leave that where that's at, contrast. Okay. I'm gonna go back into this mask. I'm gonna increase shadows just a tiny bit more. I'm also gonna warm up my subject a little bit. I felt like for some reason he looked a little bit cooler, his color temperature wise, a little bit more towards cold. So if I warm up just the subject, I think it matches this background that sort of looks like some warm is coming in. And I don't think we're quite done. I think I want to add one last thing, a linear gradient coming from this top corner, exposing it a little bit more, bringing the dehaze, kind of my signature linear gradient, the exposed up, the dehaze down, the vignette a little bit more. Okay. The last thing, probably just straighten it a little bit, just ever so slightly. And there we go. And that's the final image. All right, so thanks for watching. That is my editing process in Lightroom. So anytime someone asks me how I got a certain look on an image, I'm just gonna refer them to this video. So if this is something that you like, please subscribe. I'm looking for more subscribers, and I'll catch you in the next one.